We have emphasized the power of networking over and over here on the Veteran on the Move podcast. Today I'm talking with Alana Muller, who is what I would call a professional networker. Alana is going to help you take your networking to the next level with her proven strategy, Coffee, Lunch, Coffee.
Welcome to Veteran on the Move. If you're a veteran in transition, an entrepreneur wannabe, or someone still stuck in that job trying to escape, this podcast is dedicated to your success. And now, your host, Joe Crane.
The top 7 paths to freedom is my free gift to you for listening to the show, featuring 7 great ways for a veteran to take their first step into the exciting world of entrepreneurship. To receive your free gift, go to veteranonthemove.com, or if you're listening on a mobile device, you can text the word veteran to 38470. Alana Muller is a networking speaker, workshop facilitator, coach, and author of the book Coffee, Lunch, Coffee, a practical field guide for master networking, and a companion blog, coffeelunchcoffee.com. Her accessible, relevant, immediately actionable approach to professional networking for those interested in connecting with others, getting involved in their community, seeking to advance their career, or looking to build social relationships has helped thousands of people formulate a strategic mindset around networking while creating a game plan to get out there and connect. All right, Alana Muller from Coffee, Lunch, Coffee, thanks for being here today on the Veteran on the Move podcast. And before we get to talking about what you're doing and networking, and if you could take us back a little ways and tell us about your background.
Sure, Joe. Thanks so much for having me. I'm delighted to be here. I live and work and play in Kansas City. This is my hometown where I was born and raised. I've, certainly left Kansas City from time to time, but always seem to find my way back. My background is actually, I've got to go back to a veteran story, actually. So
Great.
When I was born, my dad was actually, he had been drafted and was working on an army base in Germany. And so when I was 9 weeks old, my mom and I moved to Germany and lived on the army base. So I wish I could tell you I could remember it, but what I will say is that, I have always had a very strong personal tie and connection to the military, and I'm so grateful for the amazing service that our men and women have given and are currently giving to our country.
Well, thanks. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
So go back, a little ways to some of the parts you can remember, and so tell us, what you did college and coming out of college and all that, and how you got into the corporate world.
So I attended Smith College, which is in Northampton, Massachusetts, for my undergrad. And there I was actually a math major and wanted to do something with numbers, something analytical. And so I was very fortunate. I was recruited actually by an investment bank out of college, moved to New York for several years and did investment banking. And what it taught me was not only how to apply my analytical skills to the work I was doing, but really see how that played out in the business environment. So that was incredibly valuable. From there, I moved to Chicago to go to the University of Chicago, where I got my MBA. And my focus there was really leveraging my math degree. I used that to focus on general management and strategy, which is what I have to say has really carried me through my career. So from there, I actually moved back to Kansas City. So my husband and I are both from the Kansas City area. And I took a job with Sprint Corporation, where they had an amazing executive development program. And so for about 3 years, I rotated through different assignments and stayed at Sprint for 10 years and had just experiences that I don't know that I could have gotten in any one other single company that I can think of. So it was truly a remarkable experience, everything from corporate strategy to business development, marketing, talent management, and HR. And when I left, I was working in wireless data product management and really had one of the neatest jobs in the company. I oversaw all of our entertainment products. So if it had to do with movies, music, television, games, advertising on a phone. That was my product line. And those were very early days of wireless data. And it was an incredibly exciting time to get to learn about an emerging technology and industry. So what happened to me, though, was, I'm having this really great time at Sprint, learning about corporate life. And I went away to a one-day retreat back at the University of Chicago. And it's an event that I go to every year, very small, almost a reunion of sorts, where the same crowd kind of shows up year after year. We have wonderful speakers. We get a chance to catch up with one another. And the year 2007 was no different. I went to my one-day retreat, flew up to Chicago in the morning, and came home that night. But what happened in between was actually very life-changing. There were two speakers that year. And as you know, what often happens with a speaker is that you listen to the speaker, you leave the room feeling energized and charged up and really ready to take on the world. And what happens is your phone rings and you're thrust right back into the reality that you came from, forgetting everything that the speaker said. But in 2007, I couldn't quite get out of my mind what the speakers were talking about. One speaker, a woman by the name of Daphne, had been a classmate of mine at the University of Chicago. Daphne also left Chicago, took a big corporate assignment, and worked on that for a few years. And then one day she decided to quit. And the reason she decided to quit was she had learned everything she needed to know, soup to nuts, how to get a retail product on a grocery store shelf. So she had been working for Kraft Foods and decided to leave Kraft in order to start her own yogurt company. Now, what I didn't mention is that all of the people who attend this one-day conference every year said that they wanted to be entrepreneurs, including myself. And yet, Daphne was the only one among us who had actually realized that goal. And so I sat there thinking to myself, what am I still doing sitting behind the same corporate desk that I have been for the last 10 years? So that got my mind churning. The second speaker was a woman by the name of Lisa Mitchell, who at the time was the Vice President of Innovation for the Ewing Marion Kauffman Foundation, which, as you may know, is the foundation of entrepreneurship. Oh, yeah. Lisa is from Kansas City, and she got up there and she was talking all about networks. And if we leverage the relationships that we have in our lives, not only can we expand economies around the world, but we can improve human welfare. And that just, to me, was mind-blowing. I thought, these are really big topics. And while I love focusing on movies, music, and television on a phone, maybe there's something more that I'm meant to do. So I got back on an airplane that night, flew home to Kansas City. My husband and son were already asleep, so I tiptoed into my room. And to this day, my husband says that I purposefully woke him up, which I woke him up. And he said, welcome home. How was the conference? And I said, it was great, but I need to talk to you. And he said, what's up? And I said, well, I've decided to quit my job. And as you might imagine, the bedside lamp came on and he wanted to know what had happened to me in Chicago aside from the brainwashing. and as I'm sure many of your listeners can relate to, I said it was simply time for me to go and start my own company. It was time for me to be the entrepreneur that I always had intended to be. Yeah. So, we talked for a very long time that night. But he finally got it. He understood that it was time for me to quit. But it's no surprise. I couldn't just march into Sprint the next morning and quit my job for so many reasons, not least of which was I had no plan. I hadn't saved my finances the way I needed to. Nothing was in order. I had 40 people reporting to me, so it didn't seem quite fair or right to just walk out on them. But I have to tell you, the thing that was really most impactful to me was that I didn't feel like I knew anybody outside the four walls of the job I had been doing for 10 years. Mm-hmm. I had been head down and overly focused on my job and not really getting out into the community in a professional business networking capacity. So, I was involved very heavily as a volunteer. I did a lot of stuff for the community. But what I found is that often when people are involved in volunteer activities, they talk about the house they're building or the money they're raising or the program that they're planning. But they fail to talk about their dreams. They fail to talk about their skill set or experiences. They fail to talk about their jobs or what they hope to do. And so I really was at a loss for what should I do next and who should I talk with. So that really sent me on a networking journey that I'll come back to in a few minutes when we talk a little more deeply about networking. I spent the next 9 or so months, I did quit. I spent about 9 months just networking. I took on some consulting assignments, but my focus was all about networking. And so that led me to several really exciting consulting assignments, one of which was long-term in nature. I ended up going back to the Kauffman Foundation, where I if you'll recall, I met Lisa Mitchell that fateful day in Chicago. And Lisa, 3 years later, hired me to run a company for the Kauffman Foundation. I originally started as a consultant, but that company was called Kauffman Fast Track. And Fast Track today continues to be one of the foremost organizations that provides curriculum to help entrepreneurs start and grow businesses successfully. So in fact, one of the things I'm proudest of, one of my best accomplishments is that while I was president of Kauffman Fast Track, where I stayed for about 4.5 years, we were able to create a curriculum very specifically targeted to the veteran community to help veterans and including active duty servicemen and women to consider starting companies and helping them to get their entrepreneurial ideas off the ground.
Yes, we've talked about the Kauffman Fast Track program and the Kauffman Foundation many times here on the podcast, and even had a couple of folks from the Kauffman Foundation on the podcast, many episodes ago. So hopefully, if somebody's been listening for a long time, they're probably familiar with it. So you were actually president of the Fast Track program for 4.5 years.
I was, and honestly, it was one of the, my proudest accomplishments. I loved it. I'm so proud of it. But you know how retreats go for me. I was invited by a Kauffman Fast Track client to come visit them in Vail, Colorado. They wanted me to see their approach to executive development, to entrepreneurial development, etc. So I ended up going out for what I thought would be just sort of, an interesting weekend in Vail, Colorado. And honestly, I didn't really want to go. I was hesitant to go because I didn't want to leave my family for the weekend. But I did. That was November of 2013. And one of the things that the facilitator of this weekend retreat did is we went through all kinds of value setting exercises to try to discover what it was that we were really meant to do, what our personal missions were. And on that Sunday, she said, well, welcome to Sunday. Congratulations, you've arrived at the final exercise of our retreat. In the next 30 minutes, I'd like you, in 5 words or fewer, to state your life's purpose. Which honestly, if she had told me on Friday that on Sunday I'd be stating my life's purpose, I probably would have laughed outdoor. It just didn't seem like something that was realistic. But on that Sunday, she said, I'll give you the 30 minutes. And frankly, it took me about 30 seconds to articulate back to her that my life's purpose was to connect, inspire, and empower community. And when I shared that with her, she said, based on what I know about you and what you've shared over this weekend, I think you're right. And, I got in the car to go back to the Denver airport. I called my husband to tell him I was coming back home, and he was not surprised to hear me say, and by the way, I think we need to talk again. It's time for me to quit my job once again. And this time he was ready for me. But what I had done partially during that time at Kauffman is I began talking about networking in earnest. I started telling people about what I had done to build my professional network since leaving Sprint all those years ago. And interestingly, people started contacting me. They wanted to know what my secret to networking was, which I thought was a little laughable. I said, the secret to networking is you reach out to somebody, you say you want to get together, they say yes, then you meet. And people would say, no, I understand that. How did you do it? And so I started keeping notes about my process and methodology for connecting with people in a meaningful way. And in 2011, when I had been at Kauffman actually for about 1.5 years, I started blogging about it. I decided I was going to blog for 30 days. It was going to be the month of November 2011. I would prepare 30 blog posts to sort of share with others in writing what my approach to professional networking was. And remember, I'm not a writer. I was a math major. So I had no personal interest in writing. I just wanted to get all this information out so that people could refer back to it. And so I set up a blog called coffeelunchcoffee.com, and I started entering my 30 blog posts. And, some were long, some were short, but it was all about what I had done to build a network that I was proud of. And interestingly, people started reaching out to me with blog topics they wanted me to cover. People said, I hope in 30 days you're not going to be done. There's probably more that we need to hear from you. And the truth is, on December 1st, I had one more thing to say. And then on December 2nd, one more thing, and still. And now it's about 6 years later, and I'm still blogging. I'm still blogging on Coffee Lunch Coffee. After that, those first 30 blog posts, and I kept blogging, I started getting contacted also by people who asked if I could print out for them all of my blog posts. And I said, no, you can print the blog posts. But I wisened up and realized that people really did want to have some sort of document that they could take with them, refer back to, take notes in. And so I'm very proud to share with you that I wrote a book in 2012 called Coffee Lunch Coffee, a practical field guide for master networking. And in that, it really is, it's called a field guide very purposefully, because what I want people to do is I want people to engage in the exercise, write in the margins, fill out the forms, and really not only strategically think about how they want to formulate a meaningful network, but then very tactically engage, work on actually building that network, making it meaningful, keeping in touch with people, et cetera, et cetera. So that book, which, I never really thought could be a company or could provide a career for me. In fact, all these years later, I am here to tell you, when I left the Kauffman Foundation, it was specifically to launch Coffee Lunch Coffee as a business. So that's what I do today very proudly.
Wow. I would like to say, how we met. Obviously, we're both from the Kansas City area, and I knew I had seen you and knew about you because of the Fast Track program, because I was going downtown to 1 Million Cups presentations on Wednesday mornings, and then ultimately Bob Hewlin, who founded the Center for Transitional Leadership, and I serve on the board for CTL, had an event that you came and spoke at for CTL, and I attended the event, and it was a networking event, and you were the speaker. And then, ironically, we were chatting afterwards, and we found out we actually went to the same high school, probably about 4 years apart.
Yeah.
But so we grew up in the same part of the Kansas City area, and I've obviously I'm very familiar with Sprint. If you're not familiar with Kansas City, Sprint is definitely a Kansas City company, and they got a huge facility really close to where I grew up. And so, and what I like to talk, I try to emphasize networking all the time on the show, because I think a lot of veterans there's a lot of misconceptions about networking. And I've even written a few blog posts on it myself, trying to explain. I think a lot of, one of my issues with networking in the beginning was it has to do with you. It's tough to really know how networking is going to pay off when you first started at the beginning, related to something like when you start college and you go and you're going to be a math major, 4 years later you're going to graduate with a math degree.
Right.
That's a very even though it's a 4-year long goal, what's going to come out on the other end. Yep. But with networking, you don't. You know that it's good to know people. And it's good to meet people. But like the networking event we went to up in Leavenworth, I had no idea that you and I were going to chat and you're going to end up on the podcast, but here we are.
That's right.
I also connected with some other folks that were in the audience, and I've been chatting with them on the side and connecting with them too. So, and now that I'm older and I've seen it come full circle many, many times, now I understand the power of networking. But if you've never had networking pay off, you don't truly understand the value of networking. So I think that's one of the reasons why a lot of people easily dismiss it. Like, you didn't want to go to Vail, Colorado. I'd rather hang out here with my family.
Right.
But look what happened when you went to Vail, Colorado.
Oh yeah, I'm eternally grateful that I went. And I don't know if it was the stars or what it was that ultimately compelled me to go, but I couldn't be more grateful for that experience. And I think your point is well taken. This is all about being open to the possibilities and leveraging opportunities when they come along. So just as you said, I didn't know that you and I would connect and that we'd be sitting here today on this call. But lo and behold, here we are, and begun to form a relationship. And my plea to everyone, and really the movement that I'm trying to start, is for people to recognize that if you're open to connecting with others in a meaningful way, in a mutually beneficial, bi-directional way for the long term, by the way, the benefits of networking are not only immense, but they're almost immeasurable. So, which I know can be a little stressful for people, but it begins to pay off rather quickly. And I can honestly say that every opportunity I've had, whether professional in nature, community oriented, or purely social, has been the result of some networking interaction way back when. And way back when may have been yesterday, it may have been last week, or it might have been 30 years ago. I don't know. But when people begin to think through the opportunities and the things that have come their way, I would challenge anybody to say, was that not the result of some networking interaction?
Absolutely. Well, hold on there, Atlanta. We're going to be right back. I'm going to take a quick break. Have you joined the Veteran on the Move Facebook group? I personally invite every guest that I have on the podcast to join the group. So the Veteran on the Move Facebook group is a great way to connect with previous podcast guests. Our Facebook group will keep you in touch with other veterans that are transitioning to entrepreneurship, and you will also get great updates and free guides on the people, programs, and resources that will help you in your transition to entrepreneurship. Okay, we're back with Alana Muller from Coffee Lunch Coffee. I want to ask, Alana, you had mentioned when you were working at Sprint for like 10 years, you came to the realization that your network was mostly confined to the Sprint network, inside of Sprint, and all those connections and business connections and things like that. And folks in the military experience the same thing, even if you've only been on a 4-year enlistment, or you can still quickly, you develop a great network of great folks, but it's very well hidden inside the military. And if you're getting ready to go through a transition, one of the most important things that you can do, and the earlier you start, the better, because networking takes time, is start to build your network outside the military. So what advice would you have for those listeners out there that are getting ready to or going through some kind of a transition to start building their network outside of their current domain?
Absolutely. So it's the perfect question. And I think it really helps us to dive in very tactically to so what do I do? How do I get started? And especially for people in transition, what I recommend is beginning with what I call the 4 lists. Okay. List number 1 is a list of people that you already know that you'd like to reconnect with. And so for people in transition, especially coming from the military, you're going to want to look outside of the military. And so what you might consider doing is thinking about people who have already transitioned that you knew from the military and reaching out to them. You might think of neighbors from any assignment that you've ever had that were not related to the military. Think about what professions they're in, and maybe they can be helpful to you. You might think about relatives. You could think about former coaches from athletic teams that you were on or your kids were on. There are, if you begin to think through it, whether it's from your faith community, your neighborhood, previous jobs, your high school, your college, there are people in your life that are doing different things. So it may be somebody you saw this morning at the gym. It may be your childhood best friend. Begin to reach out to people that are already in your network and reconnect. Tell them that you'd like to get together. And frankly, the most difficult part of networking is the outreach. It's saying, would you be willing to get together with me? For whatever reason, people find that very difficult. And I'll tell you, my favorite approach to outreach is an email. Some people prefer a phone call. There are lots of ways to do it, and we can certainly get into that. But the most important thing is make that list and commit to reaching out to people. So that's list number 1. List number 2 is slightly different, but related. It's a list of people you don't know, but would like to. And so maybe it's a business leader that you've heard of and admire. Maybe it's somebody you heard of at a conference. Maybe you heard them speak. It could be somebody that a friend of yours works with. But begin to think about people you don't know, but would like to know. And by the way, on both list number 1 and list number 2, this does not have to be overly challenging. I'm not suggesting that you make a list of your closest 200 people or 200 people you want to get to know. Why don't you start with 5 people that you'd like to reconnect with? And then for list number 2, maybe start with 3 to 5 people that you'd like to get to know. So I want people to consider kind of this in a bite-sized nature. Think of it in a way that is manageable and not overwhelming. So that's list number 1 and number 2. List number 1 being, again, people you already know but would like to reconnect with. List number 2, people you don't know but would like to. List number 3 is related very much to list number 2, and that's a list of companies or organizations you'd like to get to know. So depending on what your career interests as you transition are, begin to think about companies that you want to learn more about. Find out if they have any special recruiting for veterans. Many companies do. And so that's a wonderful way to begin to consider opportunities outside of the military. List number 4 is different than list number 1, 2, and 3. List number 4 is what I call your non-negotiables. This is your personal value set. It's the things that you're not willing to give up, not only through the networking process, but ultimately through the career transition process. So it might be a geographic requirement. Maybe you're not willing to leave the Midwest, or you're not willing to leave New York, whatever it is. I want people to think about what are their personal requirements. There are also more esoteric requirements. So for me, when I was in career transition myself, for me, I said I wanted a seat at the table. Whatever job I had, whether I took a job at somebody else's company or started my own, I wanted to be held accountable. I wanted a seat at the decision-making table. And so again, that's a little less concrete than I'm not willing to leave the Kansas City market, but still just as meaningful. And so one thing I would recommend for the listeners today is to consider either taking a look at my book, which again is called Coffee, Lunch, Coffee, a practical field guide for master networking, which is available either at Amazon or on my own website, which is coffeelunchcoffee.com. I would suggest that, which includes all of these exercises, lists 1 through 4, as well as a host of other exercises. Also on my website, there's a video that provides a good quick summary of the tips that I just shared with you on list number 1, 2, 3, and 4. So if you take a look at that homepage, you'll find this quick video. It's about 3.5 minutes, and we'll give our listeners today just sort of an overview of the Coffee, Lunch, Coffee platform.
All right, that's great. Alana, I appreciate you running us through that, a quick actionable plan to expand our network beyond the military domain. Great advice. One experience I've had with networking is, it's great to start with who you know and who you want to know, but usually I found the power of networking and the true payoff comes from meeting those people you never even knew existed.
That's right.
And but you have to start with who you know and who you want to know, and eventually those other powerful ones will come out of nowhere, and you're like, holy cow, if I had not been networking, this never would have happened.
It is so true. And I have to share that when I first began networking intentionally, I started with 5 people who I knew. I didn't know much about what they did for a living, but I knew them enough to know they were professionals in the community. Most of them I knew through my volunteer efforts. So again, we've not really talked about career aspirations, but we talked about volunteer or community-oriented things that we were working on. But I have to say, all 5 of those people finished with the question, what can I do to help you? What can I do to help you with your transition? So the great news is that your contacts want to be helpful. And so for me, the thing that I always said is, thank you so much for asking the question. The thing I need your help with is, who else should I meet? Who are you willing to introduce me to? Who else should I reach out to? And so your point is exactly right, that if people really want to leverage this concept of networking, if they really want to take advantage of the power and the ability to leverage opportunities, it is asking, who else should I connect with? Who else should I contact? And by the way, are you willing to make an introduction?
Yeah, and I wanted to ask another thing. We said when you were out at the conference in Vail, and on the last day, you said that you had to stand up and say in 5 words or less what your life purpose is.
Yes.
Can you restate that for us?
Yes, my purpose is to connect, inspire, and empower community.
Okay, that's almost exactly one of my tagline and one of my mission statements here with the Veteran on the Move podcast was connect, inspire, and empower veterans to become entrepreneurs.
Oh, how fun. I love that. That's great.
I mean, I'm do the almost exact same thing. And it's really all about connecting veterans or those guys that are still that are getting ready to go through a transition, introducing them to other entrepreneurs that have gone before them and encouraging them and making introductions so that they realize they have a choice. They can go be an entrepreneur if they want to. They don't have to go get that job.
That's right. And you know this as well as I do. Veterans are uniquely qualified for entrepreneurship. Not only do they have the ability to form teams and engage in teams in a way that is beyond what most people out there are able to do, but they are wonderful decision makers. They think through a plan and a vision for a desired outcome. So veterans make some of the most wonderful, well-qualified entrepreneurs. And so I always encourage anybody who has the inclination for entrepreneurship to pursue that.
Absolutely. Thank you for saying that, Alana. And I really appreciate you sharing your story. And I encourage you to go to look up coffeelunchcoffee.com and check out her book. If you forget all that, I'll have a link. I'll try to have a link to her book and website in my show notes on the podcast. If you forget,
and Joe, if I may, what I'd love to do is give a gift to our listeners
that would be awesome.
Today. If you'll visit me at coffeelunchcoffee.com/free gift, you'll be able to download a one-page document that provides 11 tips for making the most of a networking event. So many times when people think of networking, they think of receptions, cocktail parties, events where they're going to meet a lot of people. And that can often be a very awkward, uncomfortable, scary experience. And so these tips are designed to really help people through that process. And so it would be a privilege if people would consider downloading that.
That's great. I appreciate that, Alana. All right. Well, thanks for being here and sharing your story, and look forward to seeing your success in the future.
My pleasure. Thank you so much, Joe.
As you can tell from listening to the Veteran on the Move podcast, interviews are a great way to tell your story and spread the word about your business. If you would like to get booked as a podcast guest, I recommend Interview Valet. You can check out Interview Valet at veteranonthemove.com/valet. Be sure to check out Thrive15.com, the world's premier online education platform that helps entrepreneurs, aspiring entrepreneurs, and intrapreneurs learn how to start or grow a successful business. Start your free 30-day membership by going to Thrive15.com and use the promo code VETERAN. Thank you for listening to Veteran on the Move, your pathfinder to freedom. If you like the show, leave us a review on iTunes. Reviews are always greatly appreciated. So until next time, this veteran is Oscar Mike.